Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting the channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history horror stories exploring the darkest possibilities of what could have been. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially as the channel continues to grow. I hope you enjoy the story. My name's Mark Wilson, and I've worked as a ranger for the Ashford National Forest for going on 12 years. Most of them spent patrolling sections of backcountry so remote that running into another living soul out there counts as a genuinely rare event. Ashford's northern block, the section we all just call the Hollow, has been officially closed to public access for going on 8 years now, ever since a series of unstable slopes made trail maintenance too dangerous to justify keeping it open. No permits issued, no marked trails, no reason for anyone to be back there at all. I was 3 hours into an overnight patrol checking for storm damage after a rough system had blown through the week before, moving along a ridge that overlooks a stretch of the hollow most rangers never bother walking. When I saw the glow, it was small at first, just a flicker of orange far below through the trees, and my first thought was the obvious one: an unauthorized campfire risking a wildfire in a section of forest that hadn't seen a controlled burn in years. I radioed it in as a standard trespass call, gave dispatch my coordinates, and started working my way down the slope towards it, expecting, at worst, some overconfident backpacker who'd ignored the closure signage and gotten themselves in over their head. The descent took longer than I expected, nearly 40 minutes picking through terrain that hadn't been maintained in years, deadfall and loose scree, making every step slower and more deliberate than it should have needed to be. By the time I got low enough to actually approach the clearing where that fire was burning, something about the whole situation had started nagging at me in a way I couldn't yet name. There were no tracks. I want to be clear about how strange that is for anyone who spent real time in backcountry work. A person hiking into that clearing from any direction, across terrain that rough, leaves sign, disturbed brush, footprints in the softer patches of ground. Something. I found nothing. The clearing sat there, fire burning steady and clean at its center, and the ground around it, as far as my flashlight could pick out in a careful sweep, showed no evidence that anyone had walked in at all. There was no gear either. No tent, no pack, no bedroll. Nothing that would explain someone settling in for an overnight stay this deep in closed terrain. Just a fire, built correctly, logs arranged with the kind of practice skill that told me whoever built it knew exactly what they were doing. Burning clean and steady in the middle of an empty clearing that no trail led into. "Forest Service," I called out, keeping my voice level, professional, the way you're trained to announce yourself on any trespass call. "Anybody out here?" Nothing answered. The fire crackled on, undisturbed, and I stood at the edge of that clearing for a long moment, running through every reasonable explanation my 12 years of experience could offer. A hiker who'd stepped away to relieve himself, maybe gone just far enough into the trees that my light hadn't picked him out yet. A dropped fire from someone who'd already left the area on foot, though that didn't square with how clean and steady it was still burning, well past the point an unattended fire usually starts dying down. I moved closer, and it was maybe 15 feet from the fire itself that I finally saw him, sitting on a fallen log at the clearing's far edge, close enough to the flames that I should have seen him the instant I stepped into that open space, and hadn't, not until I was already most of the way across it. "Evening," he said, before I'd even gotten a proper look at his face, and something about the flatness of his voice put me on edge immediately. The same careful, controlled feeling I usually only get on calls that are about to go badly wrong. "This section of forest is closed," I said, keeping my hand near my radio without drawing attention to the movement. "You mind telling me how you got in here?" He looked up at me then, and I got my first real look at his face in the firelight, and I want to describe what was wrong with it as precisely as I can, because it's the detail I've turned over most since that night. He looked like a man, ordinary features, weathered the way someone who spends real time outdoors gets weathered, but his expression sat wrong on his face, a smile held too steady, too long, without the small, natural shifts a real smile carries even at rest. "Walked in," he said. "Same as you, I'd guess. There's no trail into this section. Hasn't been maintained in 8 years. Didn't need a trail," he said. And something in the way he said it made my stomach drop. Casual and untroubled, like the statement wasn't strange at all from where he was sitting. I keyed my radio, giving dispatch my exact coordinates and a description, and got back only static, thin and broken. Dispatch's voice cutting in and out badly enough that I couldn't tell if my transmission had even gone through clearly. Radio dead zones aren't unusual this deep in the hollow, terrain and distance from the nearest repeater making reliable contact spotty at the best of times. But something about the specific quality of that static, a wrongness underneath the normal signal loss, made the hair on my arms stand up. "Radio's not going to help you much out here," the man said, watching me with that same too steady smile. "Never does. This deep in." "You been out here before?" "Plenty of times," he said. "Longer than you'd believe, probably." I studied him more carefully while he spoke, and the wrongness kept accumulating in small pieces. His clothes looked worn in a way that didn't match any specific era I could place. Not modern hiking gear, not obviously old-fashioned either, just generically, unsettlingly timeless. His hands, resting loose on his knees, didn't move the way hands naturally shift and adjust even at rest. And the fire itself, I realized, watching it more closely now, wasn't consuming the logs the way a real fire should. No char building up, no logs shrinking down toward embers, just steady, clean flame that looked, the longer I stared at it, less like something burning and more like something performing the appearance of burning. "I need you to come with me," I said, falling back on procedure because procedure was the only solid ground I had left to stand on. "This section's closed for safety reasons. I can escort you out." "You could try," he said, and for the first time, something shifted behind that too steady smile, an edge creeping into his voice that hadn't been there a moment before. "Most people who find this fire don't leave the way they came in, though. Thought you should know that before you decide how hard to push this." I backed away from him, slow, deliberate. The same careful retreat I'd use backing away from anything in the field that might read sudden movement as provocation, and he didn't rise from that log to follow. Simply watched me go with that unsettling stillness, firelight flickering across a face that still hadn't blinked, not once, in the entire conversation. I made it maybe 30 yards back toward the ridge before the forest around me started behaving wrong in ways I still struggle to fully describe. The trees, familiar enough that I should have been able to navigate back the way I'd come without much conscious thought, seemed to shift their spacing every time I looked away and back, gaps closing where they shouldn't, opening where dense brush should have blocked easy passage. My flashlight beam, sweeping the terrain ahead, kept catching glimpses of the same distinctive fallen log twice, 3 times, in configurations that told me, with a cold certainty I couldn't argue with, that I was somehow circling back toward that same clearing no matter which direction I actually tried to move. "Dispatch, come in," I said into my radio, and got nothing but that same wrong, underlying static. Worse now, closer to a low, rhythmic hum, buried underneath the normal signal loss that I didn't like the sound of at all. I stopped moving, forced myself to breathe, and fell back on the most basic piece of wilderness training I'd ever received, the kind drilled into every ranger from their first season. When you're turned around, stop, orient by something fixed. Don't keep moving blind and making it worse. I found the ridgeline above me, visible even through the canopy as a slightly darker break against the night sky, and fixed my eyes on it, refusing to let my attention drift back toward wherever that clearing sat behind me, and started moving towards that fixed point with a deliberate, stubborn focus that ignored every instinct telling me the terrain ahead didn't look quite right. It took nearly an hour, far longer than the terrain should have required, but the ridgeline held steady this time, growing closer instead of looping back, and somewhere in that final stretch, the wrongness in the trees around me finally settled, spacing and gaps returning to something that matched my actual memory of this section, rather than that strange, shifting geometry I'd been fighting through. My radio crackled back to full clarity almost the instant I crested that ridge, dispatcher's voice coming through clean and immediate, asking for an update on the trespass call I'd radioed in over an hour earlier. And I gave them a report that stuck close to the facts I could actually defend. An unauthorized fire, an individual who'd refused to comply with instructions to leave, a subsequent loss of radio contact during my attempt to disengage. I left out most of what had actually happened in those trees because standing there on that ridge, forest fire crew already being dispatched to handle the fire risk, I genuinely didn't know how to explain the rest of it in language that wouldn't get my judgment questioned for the remainder of my career. The follow-up crew that went in the next morning to assess and extinguish the fire found the clearing exactly where I'd marked it on the map. No fire, no fallen log, no sign in daylight that anything had ever burned there at all, not even the kind of scorched earth and ash a real fire, however carefully doused, should have left behind. I walked that same clearing myself 2 days later, once I'd worked up the nerve to go back with backup, and found nothing except undisturbed forest floor, leaf litter and deadfall exactly as untouched as it should have been in a section closed to visitors for 8 straight years. I filed an official report that stuck to what I could defend under scrutiny, and I've never spoken about the rest of it. The shifting trees, the radio static that didn't sound like ordinary interference, the way that man's smile never once wavered through an entire conversation. To anyone except a couple of long-time colleagues I trust enough to believe me without demanding an explanation I can't actually give. One of them, a ranger named Robert Turner, who's worked this district even longer than I have, told me something afterwards that stuck with me since, delivered quiet and matter-of-fact over coffee in the station break room. He said there'd been other reports over the years, scattered, unofficial, rangers who'd caught sight of fires burning deep in closed sections of backcountry where no fire should exist, always at night, always in terrain too remote for any hiker to have reached on foot. Most of them, he said, had the good sense to report it and walk away without getting close enough to actually see who was tending it. I don't patrol that section of the hollow anymore if I can help it, and when duty does occasionally send me back into that general area, I stick close to the maintained boundary lines. No unnecessary descents into terrain that hasn't seen a real trail in 8 years, no matter what I think I might be seeing burning down below. I think about that fire sometimes, still burning clean in my memory exactly the way it looked that night. Logs arranged with careful, practiced skill, flames that never seemed to actually consume anything at all. And I wonder, some quiet nights on shift, how many other fires are burning right now in other closed, forgotten stretches of forest nobody's supposed to visit, waiting patiently for someone curious enough or unlucky enough to climb down and get a closer look.